thank you all for coming to my talk about the preliminary results of a research survey I conducted on the character traits of polyglots. Let me start by defining some of the terms that I'm going to be using over and over again. First of all, we have multilingual. Multilingual people are people who speak multiple languages, 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 languages, usually because they acquired them as they were growing up. As children, they were in their environment. Whereas polyglots, people who speak many languages, maybe they start out as multilingual people, but they know their many languages for the most part as a result of studying them, learning them when they are somewhat older. Another difference between polyglots and multilingual people is that multilingual people are relatively common by most statistics. Over half the world is to some degree naturally multilingual, whereas polyglots are much more rare, harder. Then I use the term polyglottery to refer to the entire process of being and becoming a polyglot. I suppose there are some accidental polyglots in the diplomatic service who just end up knowing lots of languages, but I think for most of us, starting out, we say to ourselves, oh, I like learning languages. Hey, I'm good at learning languages. Language learning is fun for me. I'd like to learn more languages. I'd like to get better at languages. I'd like to learn lots of languages. I'd like to learn to be a polyglot. So that's polyglottery for me, that whole process of finding out that it's an important part of your identity, learning languages. And from that, we get the polyglot community, which Richard just alluded to. That's all of you here. You don't have to be a polyglot yet, but if you're on the path of polyglottery, you're a member of the polyglot community, which is something that started to form about 15 years ago through the internet, online forums, making YouTube videos, and now coming together at these gatherings and conferences where we have more than 540 people assembling based on our mutual shared love of learning languages. So if we have a polyglot community that's that large, you would think that there might be some research into polyglots and or into polyglottery using these terms or some other terms, but I would love it if somebody here could prove me wrong. I am not able to find a single Scopus indexed journal article about anything like this. It's as if we don't exist, as if we're not worthy of recognition either as a separate linguistic phenomenon or being taken seriously, or even in terms of what we might contribute to the so-called normal learners. Normal learners, I mean by people who are not fanatics about language learning, people, which are most people who think language learning is kind of boring or drudgery. They might have to do it, and then they don't do it all that well, and so applied linguists like to look at so-called good learners and see what can be learned from them to help these normal learners. You might think that they would look at really proficient learners like polyglots, but they don't even do that. The only kind of polyglot that gets any kind of attention is the so-called hyperpolyglot, the person who knows many languages. And these people, because we're such freaks, we do get attention from not academic scholars investigating polyglottery, but from investigative journalists who write articles like this one. The mystery of people who speak dozens of languages. What can hyperpolyglots teach the rest of us? This is an article that came out in the New Yorker about 2 months ago. I'm curious, have many of you seen or heard of this article? Okay, a couple of people hands here. For those who don't know, the New Yorker is a weekly magazine of fiction and investigative journalism with a very wide circulation. It's a highbrow magazine. It has a print circulation of 1.25 million issues and an online version. And this is the kind of magazine that sits around in doctors' offices and is in libraries, and people hold on to this and read it over and over again. So this is the kind of magazine that's going to be read by more than 1.25 million people, and it's probably reached about 10 million people by now. And among these people were a number of lost acquaintances of mine, people I haven't heard from in many years, and this article is not about me per se, but there are a couple of paragraphs about me in this article. And I had no idea it was being written. They called me and said, hey, I read about you here. So they gave me the link to this article, and I read it. And there was something about it that really bothered me. The thing that really bothered me was this paragraph. Much of the data on hyperpolyglots is still sketchy, but from a small sample of prodigies who have been tested by neurolinguists, responded to online surveys, or shared their experience in forums, a partial profile has emerged. An extreme language learner has a more than random chance of being a gay left-handed male on the autism spectrum with an autoimmune disorder such as asthma or allergies. So This bothers me for 3 reasons. The first thing is that why is there no research? Why is it still sketchy? Why is there no data? The first time I heard anything along these lines was from Michael Erard when he was researching his book about 10 years ago, and he is extensively quoted in this article. And he said these kind of things. And I said, why do you have these expectations? And he just said, well, there just seems to be, that fits the profile. It seems to be the pattern. But there was no data then, and there's no data now. So that's the first thing that bothers me. The second thing that bothers me is that, well, the one thing I like about it is the term extreme language learner. I like that a lot more than hyperpolyglot. That's a nice term. But I am very definitely an extreme language learner. And I am left-handed and I am male, but I don't have these other traits, and so I don't want people imputing traits to me that I don't have. People are going to read it, so why should anybody have anything imputed to them? And in particular, these traits, are these the kind of traits that you could take credit for? No, that's the third thing about this article that really bothers me. It implies that extreme language learners learn lots of languages not because they find their passion for them and they devote many hours and they pursue their dream in order to do that. It implies that we're able to do this because we're somehow wired in order to do that. So when I read this, I thought, somebody ought to do a research survey about this. Somebody ought to get the data. Somebody ought to go out and really do it. Somebody ought to give a survey to the polyglot community and find out what we're really like. But nobody's doing that. So I guess maybe I should do it. And so I did. I sat down and I compiled a very lengthy survey, comprehensive survey, asking questions about all the different kind of character traits I could think about and all different aspects related to learning languages. And I made this survey available with Richard's help. It was put on the website here, through social media, on YouTube. And I'm just curious, how many of you have taken this survey? Okay, a number, but not as many as I had imagined, because otherwise I don't know who all these people are. But about 10 days ago, I went and I saw, so I had to do the research here, I had 640 responses. And most of them took an average of 36 minutes to complete this. So I really appreciate them taking all the time to do that. Who are they? It's much too small for you to see, I'm sure, over here, but this is all the blue countries are represented, and about a quarter of the respondents come from the United States, about a quarter from the big Western European countries, about a quarter from the other rest of Europe, and another quarter from the rest of the world. So it is a global study, but it's very much one of Western civilization. So I used this survey to go and I have lots of data now, but it's a nightmare for me. I'm not a quantitative research person. I've never done it before. It's good that I have all this facts and information, but now how do I distill it? How do I get it out? And I realized the first thing that was difficult is I realized my survey design was less than optimal. Those of you who took the survey, you might remember I asked questions about music, musical abilities, musical aptitude, artistic aptitude, mathematics, sleeping. I bundled all of those together under one rubric when I should have put them as separate questions. So a lot of the responses don't jump to the naked eye. They have to be put through what's called coding in a special program called SPSS for making sense of statistical information. I have some kind colleagues at my university in the business department who do this kind of thing all the time, and they say they're excited that I have this larger survey. They say that I can get statistically significant findings from this, and they're eager to help me in terms of just the functioning of it, but it's a long, steep learning curve. So I haven't gotten a lot of the information out of it yet, but since I promised to do this for this conference, I wanted to give a preliminary, limited initial report based on what I call a cluster analysis of 2 particular questions. That is, I'm going to be looking at the question. Question 51 was, including your native language or languages, how many languages would you say that you know in total? That is, you can use and understand to any degree. And question 53 is, how many foreign languages have you ever studied overall? So based on your response to these questions, what are your other responses? How do you fit into those more than average possibilities or probabilities of having any given character trait? So I took my 640 respondents and I divided them according to these questions into 3 groups of as equal numbers as I could get. Based on how many languages you know, I found that I could get a group of people who say they know 3 or fewer languages. I call them the beginner group in polyglottery. There are 229 of these people. People who know 4 to 6 languages, I call them the intermediate group. They know there are 230 of these. And the advanced group who know 7 or more languages, there are 174 of these. Based on the other question, how many languages have you studied? I find the groupings to be 4 languages or less. I have 218 people. 5 to 9 languages, 233 people, and 10 or more languages, 182 respondents. So initially, I wanted to have this be a report between the polyglot community and the normal learners, but I couldn't find any normal people. I don't know any normal people. So I had to limit myself to statistics about the numbers of the averages of possibilities of being certain things, and look at these groups. I should say that in the advanced groups, the people who have 7 or more languages that they know, or 10 or more languages that they have studied, they're already smaller than the other groups, and these 2 groups include the so-called polyglots, people who know I think we all agree, there's no agreed upon definition. 7 languages, 10 languages. Where does the hyperpolyglot start? 12, 20, they're both together in this group. If I ever get enough responses that I can separate the extreme language learner from the just very proficient language learner, I'll do that too. But for now, they're all together. So based on these 3 groups, and why did I use both groups? Because I think it's ironic that I, of all people, should have to go around asking people how many languages you know. I've always hated that question myself and tried to avoid it. But I found slightly different answers depending on different perspectives. What have I learned? How do I know it? How do I use it? So by using both of these, I got slightly different answers, and I think they're more accurate if we take the average between them. So I used these groups to test hypothesis A, which is the red underlined sentence, that an extreme language learner has a more than random chance of being a gay left-handed male on the autism spectrum with an autoimmune disorder, such as asthma or allergies. So we're looking for all 5 of these together, gay plus left-handed plus male plus autistic plus autoimmune. Of my 640 respondents, I could immediately filter the data. It's too small for you to read, I'm sure, but up here I'm looking for, this is homosexuality, male, left-handedness, allergies, high-functioning autism, Asperger's syndrome, and of my 640, I have exactly 0 people. 0 have all of these traits. So that's good to know. So then I said, well, I can still test for the individual traits, see how prevalent they are in the polyglot community. So this is what I've done for all of these, when I can find the general average. You can get lots of statistics about the random possibility or probability of having any character trait among the general population in North America and Western Europe today. And for homosexuality, that's actually smaller than I thought. The most common figure I found was only 1.7% of people are homosexuals, but among our 640 respondents, we have about 10 times that number, 11.36. So I'm going to explain this next chart in detail because you're going to be looking at a similar chart for all the next 25 or so slides. So in the 2 blue columns, here over no and studied over here, this is the question, how many languages do you know? How many languages have you studied? And in the rows, the top row, this one here, is people who know less than 3 languages. Of 229 people, 15 said they were gay. So that's about 7%. Of people who say they know 4 to 6 languages, there are 230, 31 of them said that they were gay. That's about 13.5%. And of people who know more than 7 languages, of 174 people, 26 said they were gay, so that's 15%. For people who have studied languages, based on that parameter, people who have studied fewer than 4 languages, of 218 people, 14 said they were gay, so that's about 6.5%. 5 to 9, 230 people, 22 said they were gay, that's about 9.5%. And people who have studied more than 10 languages, of 182, 36 said they were gay, that's 20%. So you can see, I think there is a clear progression, pattern. The term that we use is, because it's higher for the whole group than the average, this is called correlation. There's no explanation for why this might be. I leave that for other people to investigate, to research, but the fact is that there's a strong correlation between homosexuality and polyglottery, and it seems to get stronger as you get more languages under your belt. So, how about the second variable? Left-handedness, okay? their average possibility of being left-handed is about 10 to 15% of the general population is left-handed. And of polyglots, it is, people in the polyglot community, it's 11%, 11.5%. So right in the middle. And on the chart going down, you'll see this middle group is kind of an anomaly. They often don't cooperate and sort of giving me a nice smooth pattern. But you see that they're the highest group, but they're still under the 15% mark. And the other groups, the people who know more than 7 languages, only 9% of them are left-handed. So the idea that left-handedness and polyglotry go together seems to have very little foundation. So throw that one out. How about male gender? Would you all look around right now? Do you see more women than men, more women than men, or men than women? Seems about the same to me. Or if anything, maybe even more women. And that's about right for the general statistics in Western society these days. About 51% female, 49% male. Well, why then did I get a response rate that indicated that almost 70% of people interested in polyglotry are male? That's after we specifically asked, as I put the survey out, I asked, please ask women to respond. Please get more females to respond. But they never did. It stayed consistent at about 70% male and 30% female respondents throughout the about 3 weeks that I've been running the survey. So how does that break down? Same way, you do see a pattern, okay? You see at the beginning level, you have only 62% male, but by the advanced level, you have about 76% male. So yes, based on the survey results, it does seem that polyglotry is somehow a male trait. How about the autistic spectrum? Asperger's syndrome is about 5% in the general population, about 6% of our community, so 12 times higher. And if you look at the percent charts, you'll see that there is basically a pattern that it seems to be increasing the more advanced, the more into polyglotry you get. So yes, it does seem like there's a correlation between Asperger's and polyglottery. High-functioning autism is about 0.25% of the general population, but about 2.5% of our population, so 10 times higher. And this has a reverse pattern from Asperger's in that it's clustered more at the beginner's level. People who are starting out in polyglotry have a higher correlation with high-functioning autism than those who are more advanced. So how about allergies? Allergies among the general population are about 35% of people have allergies. People who responded to this survey are less than 30%, 28%. And in particular, again, it's the middle group that is the average norm, but the lower group and the higher group have less, far less than the standard possibility. So this is called a negative correlation. If you're into polyglotry, you're less likely to have allergies. So next time people ask you why you study languages and they don't like the answers you give them, tell them you do it to fend off your allergies. Asthma among the general population is about 8%. Among our respondents, about 10.5%, so slightly higher, not terribly much so. And if you look at it, again, it's clustered in different places. Here, people who know, the higher is in the lower range, but people who know more languages have less asthma, okay? And people who studied more languages. So extreme language learners, if we go back to the original hypothesis, extreme language learners, 9.1% over 8.3, there's no significance there. So there's probably no relationship between asthma and polyglotry either. So if I go to make some general conclusions about hypothesis A, I'd say it's only partially correct, and it would be better to rephrase it, take out the word extreme language learner and put in enthusiastic language learner, because the traits we're seeing are throughout the polyglot community, not just in the extreme language learners. And that he has a more than random chance of being a gay male on the autistic spectrum. And these traits are more pronounced as his polyglotry advances. Polyglotry is kind of a condition, a disease, it gets more severe. Okay? So, again, now we've reduced it to 3 factors, gay plus male plus autistic. And of my 640 people, when I scan that for all 3, homosexuality, male, high-functioning Asperger, I lost it, exactly 1 person. 1 out of 640 had all of those. So I'm going to rephrase that hypothesis again and say it would be best rephrased if you said the more his polyglotry advances, the more an enthusiastic language learner has a more than random chance of displaying each of the following 3 traits: male gender, homosexuality, and Asperger's. So that's the specifics of it. How about the general worldview behind that? Again, what bothered me is that it said that I was a hyperpolyglot because of fixed and immutable traits, things that I have no choice or no control over. And it said that this is basically, if we put it in philosophical or theological terms, this is predetermination, predestination. And I'd rather have a worldview of free choice, free will. So I'd love to end this part of my presentation on a triumphant note saying, well, look, I showed that half of the hypothesis was wrong and that it was sloppily phrased, and we don't need to worry about this anymore, so we can have the worldview we want. It's all free choice, right? Unfortunately, I have to be honest and say, while I was looking for these things, I did find that there are many other immutable traits that are shared by members of the polyglot community. So what are these? The first one is, well, the next 3 slides refer to laterality, which is our preference to use the right or left-hand side of our body. And ambidexterity means using both hands, but it basically means not having hand dominance. And we have eye dominance and foot dominance on the next slides. And among the general population, the chance of having no dominance in general is always just about 1%. So how about ambidexterity in the polyglot community? It's much higher. It's almost 5%. And if you look at the statistical charts, again, you'll see that it seems to increase at least slightly as your polyglotry advances, your condition gets more severe. So I think the formulation that polyglots are left-handed was not so much incorrect, it's just imprecise. Probably somebody observed an ambidextrous person writing left-handed, say, and assumed that they were left-handed when they're really ambidextrous. 5% is not so strange. But the next one is really strange to me. Again, only 1% of the general population has no eye dominance, but among people who responded to this survey, they said that, and again I gave a little test because I think most people don't know if they're eye dominant or foot dominant. You probably know if you're left-handed or right-handed, but do you know if you're left-eyed or right-eyed, left-footed or right-footed? So I gave some instructions for how to figure that out, and my first thought is, well, maybe the instructions were confusing or they did it wrong. But if they did it wrong, they would say that they were left-footed and they were right-footed, or right-footed when they were left-footed. They wouldn't say that they had no foot dominance. They would say they were left-eyed rather than right-eyed. They wouldn't say no eye dominance. And in point of fact, 26%, almost 27% of people in the polyglot community say they have no eye dominance. So that is done across the board. There's no pattern of increase or decrease, really. Seems striking, okay? So that's another aspect of laterality. And then to foot dominance, again, 1% in the general population, about 12%, 13% in our population, and it does seem to increase ever so slightly, again, with the more severe versions of the condition of polyglotry. So overall, you would have to say that yes, this is score one for the neurolinguist. There is something in the wiring of the polyglot brain that seems to be inclined to have laterality be a factor in making you a polyglot. So male gender, we could also have female, we could also have other gender, okay? And among the general population, it's only 0.3% are other gendered. Our population has 1.42, so it's higher, okay? Not strikingly like with the eye dominance, but it is a factor. And here, if it's higher anywhere, again, it's at the beginning levels, not at the extreme levels or in the middle. Homosexuality, there's also bisexuality. Similar percentage of the general population, supposedly 1.8%, and of our population about 10 times higher. 10.5%. And again, it seems to be no real pattern, okay? Just spread throughout, a little bit higher here, lower here, maybe higher at some ends, okay? Sexual orientation, other. If I had known that so many, I would have listed things like asexual, pansexual, because I got quite a few of these. I just put an other category, people wrote these in. Among the general population, it's only 0.1%, but among our population, it's 5%. That's 50 times more than the general population. So that is found mostly at the beginner stage of polyglotry, okay? But it's still quite high compared to the average possibility throughout, so there's definitely a correlation there. This one nobody had mentioned before. It wasn't an original hypothesis, but it jumped out at me, birth order. I think that basically you have a about a 20% chance of being an oldest child, just as a random possibility, random statistics. But among our population, it's over 40%. And among the people who, that's clustered really in the extreme learner end, the people who've learned more languages. So there's a strong correlation between being an oldest child and ultimately becoming a polyglot. This one flabbergasted me. Going back to my definition of multilingual, I just assumed, again, if most of the world is multilingual, then it stands to reason that less than half of the world is monolingual. And I just assumed that being multilingual would be a good springboard to becoming a polyglot. But actually only 75% of the people in our community come from monolingual backgrounds. So only 25% are multilingual. And that is slightly more at the beginning levels are more likely to be monolingual. The advanced levels are less likely, a little bit, but still much higher than the general possibility. So thinking about this, it just seemed to me, as I said, I would assumed that being naturally multilingual would be a good first step to becoming a polyglot, but it seems to be the reverse, that if you get a lot of languages for free, they don't seem mysterious and wonderful and beautiful to you. But if you only have one and there's all these others out there, then they're more fascinating. How about polyglot genes or patterning? Things that you get from your family. Do you inherit them, or do you just see what your parents are doing if they're polyglots? There's no general statistics for this, but about 33%, a third of the people who took the survey said they had a family member who was a polyglot. And that is clustered very heavily among the people who know more languages, more so than the other groups. So having a family member who is a polyglot does seem to influence how many languages you're going to end up ultimately knowing. So if I can come to some general conclusions about that worldview, I would have to say that although it's incorrect in a number of its original specific details, other specific forces emerge when it's examined, such that the proposition that many of the character traits of polyglots are of a fixed and immutable nature, this cannot unfortunately be denied. I'd like to deny it, but I can't. I'd like to deny it ultimately altogether and submit counter-hypothesis B. Counter-hypothesis B is that the salient characteristics of polyglots should reflect their own free will, their free choice. These should be related particularly to things that you can learn, you can train yourself in, and they should be related specifically to language study and language learning. So I would think that the things that would make a polyglot, for example, are how much time do we spend studying? How systematically do we study? What is our attitude towards learning languages and the like? So I could also test for this in my survey to at least a limited degree at the present time. So I start looking for various traits, and one that came out was obsessive compulsive tendencies. Not so much the real disease, but just the inclination to like to have things nice and organized, systematic. Among the general population, that's about 2.3%, but we're about twice that amount at 4.5%. And that, again, does seem to be clustered, not so much in the people who know languages, it's even throughout there, but in the people who have studied more than 10 languages, that's where we find it the highest. So that's not a surprise to me that channeling obsessive tendencies, you can study languages obsessively and learn a lot of languages, so that makes perfect sense to me. Another one that just leapt out, I had no idea about this one, is sense of direction. This is not mental direction, purpose in life, this is physical direction, not getting lost. And 15% of people who took the survey said they had an excellent sense of direction. They described it that way. But this was clustered very much so, twice as much, among the people who either know or have studied more languages compared to the other two groups. So this is one of the few where I can see a real difference between the extreme language learners, the polyglots, and the people who are setting out on the path of polyglotry. And thankfully, sense of direction is actually something you can develop, you can improve upon. This one also is not surprising to me. The longer you stay in school, the more exposed chances you have to study language in classes, be in a library, be in a studious environment. So I looked at how many people had doctoral degrees, and this varies from country to country. Germany's the highest, with about 3.8% of the general population. Most of the other Western European countries, North America, between 2% and that amount. So no more than 3.8%. But among respondents to the survey, almost 10%. 9.8% of the people who took the survey have doctoral degrees, and they are less so in the beginning levels, more in the advanced levels. So the more you study, the more you study. Okay? And if you study, if you're a good student, that helps, okay? So I also asked, how many people said that when they were students, they had outstanding academic records or excellent academic records? And again, about a full third of the people said that they did. But if we look at where it's clustered, okay, we find that it's much heavier in the advanced groups than in the other groups. People who know or study more languages are substantially more likely to say that they were excellent students than people who didn't. So guess what? You know who becomes a polyglot? Good students. Is that a surprise? I don't think so. Another question said, have you had to overcome a negative experience learning languages in order to find your passion for polyglottery? And about a third of the people who took the survey said yes, they had. They've had a negative experience, they've had to learn a new way, a different way of learning languages. And this one, we're looking the other direction, this one that's lower among the people who know more languages. So if you know or study more languages, you're less likely to have ever had a negative experience. Okay? You've always had a good time learning languages. So people who've had fun, enjoyed learning languages, learn more languages. Is that a surprise? Another question said, you know, how many more languages would you like to know? How many languages would you like to learn? And so of 640 respondents, almost half of them said, I would like to learn as many languages as possible. I would like to learn as many languages as I possibly can. And once again, this is strikingly higher among people who know or study more languages. 67%, 62% say they want to learn as many languages as they can, versus people who are just starting out and can't conceive of learning as many languages as they can. They just want to learn more. So I feel like this is the kind of really ground-shaking discovery, such as that it's hot in the sun and cool in the shade. But it needs to be pointed out that people who want to learn more languages end up learning more languages. This is very much a question of your own volition. It doesn't just happen. Okay? Another question referred to personality change. Most people report that when they speak a foreign language, they have a different personality, but about a quarter of the respondents said, no, they don't. They keep a consistent personality in all of their languages. And again, this is clustered somewhat more highly in the people who know more languages. They are more consistent in their personality versus people who either study or know fewer languages. They're more likely to have different personalities. This is a sad one for me, that only 30% of people who took the study for more than 2 hours a day. They call themselves passionate language students and students, but they study less than 2 hours a day, most of them. Okay? You should study for 12 hours a day. Why not? Sure, everybody can do it. So here, again, another one of these fantastic discoveries, people who know or who study more languages are substantially more likely to spend more time studying. You study more, you learn more. Wow, who would have thought? How do you study? Some people study haphazardly, but some people study according to a systematic study schedule. Again, 17% of our respondents said they did, but they are clustered much more highly in the upper ranges. So people who know and study more languages study more systematically than people who are just setting out on the path of polyglottery. And finally, we have systematic maintenance cycles for keeping up the languages you've already studied. Only 6% of people do this, of all the people who responded. And it's not too much higher, but again, it's highest among the groups of people who know more. So people who become extreme language learners are people who study more, who learn more, who want to learn more, and who have more systematic cycles. So those are my general conclusions. Hypothesis B, the free will or free choice hypothesis, is also borne out. Polyglots or extreme language learners do display many attributes related to language study that are matters of their personal effort and decisions, and they display these attributes to greater degrees than do those at the beginning and intermediate stages of polyglottery. So thinking the two hypotheses together, I can come to two general conclusions. And one is that the character traits in the study are those that we can find at all levels of polyglotry, throughout the polyglot community, not just extreme language learners, but beginning people who are very enthusiastic about it in the beginning and middle stages. Sometimes you find them clustered at the beginning, sometimes in the middle, sometimes at the end, but in any case, they are far more of these traits that would set us as a community apart from the general public than there are traits that would set the more advanced learners apart from the beginning learners. So if anybody's interested in doing more research into this, there's no need to just focus on extreme language learners. You could focus easily upon the polyglot community to find the traits that we tend to share. The other conclusion is that the formulation should never be that an enthusiastic language learner or an extreme language learner has a higher than average possibility of having all of these traits together, but rather that he has a higher possibility, higher than random odds, of having any given one of these. So to summarize, what are these traits? Compared to the average possibility or probability, a polyglot or anyone in the polyglot community is about 1.5 more times likely to be male, about 3 to 4 times more likely to be other gendered, about 6 times more likely to be bisexual, about 7 to 10 times more likely to be homosexual, 35 to 40 more times more likely to be other sexual orientation. Now, all of these fascinating subjects for research, but I don't see any direct relation that you can say between these things and learning languages, because obviously all sorts of people can learn languages, not just people who have these traits. Also, I'm sorry, I should have said this earlier, 18 times more likely to have Asperger's syndrome and 7 times more likely to have high-functioning autism. And these, I can see, do have some relation. This condition enables you to focus on language learning, so it makes sense that this should be more prevalent in our community. Continuing with the same ideas of compared to the average probability, a polyglot is 6 times more likely to be ambidextrous, 23 times more likely to have no eye dominance, 15 times more likely to have no foot dominance, 2.5 times more likely to be an oldest child, 1.4 times more likely to have a monolingual background, 2 to 3 times more likely to have OCD, and I put that in quotations to show that it's not the real severe disease, but the tendencies, and 3 to 4 times more likely to hold a doctorate, and I put both of those in red because those are things that you can control to a certain degree. You can cultivate these tendencies, you can fight them, you can channel them, you can study longer, so these are things that you have under our control, whereas the ones in black we don't. Compared to those at earlier stages of polyglotry, polyglots, extreme language learners here, I am talking about that, are 1.8 times less likely to have had a negative language learning experience ever. They're 2 times more likely to have a polyglot family member. They're 2 times more likely to have an excellent sense of direction. Again, I found out that this is something that you can train and improve upon. You're 1.6 times more likely to have an excellent academic record. You can always study harder. 1.5 times more likely not to experience personality shift with languages. I think that's a question of perspective and expectations. You can learn to have a steady personality. 2 times more likely to aspire to learn as many languages as they can. Just say it. I want to learn as many languages as I possibly can. Just repeat that over and over again, and eventually you will. 2 times more likely to study for more than 2 hours a day. Yes, you can always study for more. Okay. 1.5 times more likely to have a systematic study schedule, and 2 to 3 times more likely to have a systematic maintenance schedule. Again, these are in red because these are things that I think that you have a certain degree, a high degree of control over. So here's some food for thought. Of the 1 gay male autistic respondent in the survey, okay, it turned out that he also is an oldest child. Do you really think that it's due to these things that he knows 10 languages and he says that he studied 25? Or isn't it more likely it's because he openly says, I want to learn as many languages as possible, and he spends 5 to 6 hours a day doing it, okay? I think that's pretty clear. So here's some closing notes on further study and results. What I gave to you today is only preliminary. The study's still open. I have results coming in, but I've seen the patterns are set. I have a lot of really interesting data about music and art and mathematics and exercise habits, diet, all these things that remains to be unpacked. Again, I have colleagues at my university who are interested just because they love statistics, but I'm going to have to learn a lot from them, and quite frankly, I've already been contacted by a number of applied linguists who said, hey, I took the survey, I'm really interested in hearing your results. And I wanted to say, well, then why didn't you do this survey? Why did you make me do it? I didn't want to do this. But then I also want to say, hey, if there's anybody out there who is both into statistics and cares about language and research, if somebody would like to collaborate in getting this data out sooner, I'd love to hear that. Furthermore, I guess I'm a masochist, I am already cogitating another study, because as I said, this one wasn't designed optimally. I'm thinking about doing another survey that will be designed specifically with polyglots, the polyglot community in mind, and will ask more pointed questions about what it means to know a language, what kind of languages you know, how you know and use the languages. And this current study was largely anonymous. But I would like this next study to be by sort of invitation. I'll announce that I'm doing it, and then if you'd like to take it, you write to me. So I have at least an email address. It can still be anonymous, but I have an email address so that if you give particularly interesting answers to questions, I can contact you and get more details. So you can do better research if you follow up a survey with interviews. So I would like to thank everybody who took the survey. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If anybody would like more information about the survey, this is my address at my university. You can write to me there. And I think I left enough time for about 10 minutes of questions.
Hi, really interesting study. I'm just curious, how can you control, so that you know that, for example, it's just, it's not more likely that men will take a survey, for example, than women? Or for any of the traits, I mean, that because it's a voluntary thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I mean, any survey is only good as the answers you get. As I say, I don't believe that result looking out at this audience. I see equal proportions. For some reason that seems skewed, but a survey is only good as the answers you get. This was not put, on a men's magazine. It was put on the website of this conference. It was put on, I did a YouTube video announcing it just to the general audience, and after a week when I saw this pattern emerging, I specifically said, and we specifically asked, women please respond to this, and they didn't. So I don't think it was put out in a venue that would not reach females. I really don't have an explanation for it.
I'd like to ask, what are the main difficulties that polyglots face when they learn new language from your experience and your self-study for languages that are also systematic and non-systematic? People can learn language by their own, and some people could go to summer schools and study in that country that language. What are the main difficulties that polyglots do usually face from your experience and your research?
That doesn't really relate directly to what I said. I think that relates more to Professor Nikulicheva's previous talk about different language strategies, different studies. As you mentioned, some people learn well by going to self-study, some people learn well by classes. So again, I did have some questions about that kind of thing in my survey, but they're the ones that I still need to unpack. I'm not prepared to report on that yet.
The first part of your talk, you compared the survey results with percentages of the general population, and I just wanted to see what a little bit more information about those numbers, because obviously you'll have different results if you're using the world population or specific Western countries, or different age groups, backgrounds, or even other kinds of conferences. So, thank you.
Yes, very good question. I did go, for example, for I looked for several places for statistics about these things, and I found the most common ones that were used, but I tried to get the best information. So for the things about autism, I went to official sites about autism, centers about autism and the like. So yes, but if you use different percentages, you would get different values. I very consciously did try to find the statistics that were, as I said, about a quarter of the people come from the United States and a quarter come from Western Europe. So I used the statistics for Western civilization. You get very, very different statistics if you did this in India or in the United Arab Emirates, definitely.
So here, hi, thank you very much. The numbers looked really, really interesting. I wanted to ask you if you plan actually to make the survey field by monolingual people to actually compare with the, instead of having this kind of general population statistics.
That was my original plan. I wanted to do that, but I was advised against doing that for a reason that I hadn't thought of, and that is, again, the survey is extremely long and detailed, and I want it to be that way to get the results, and people who were advising me said, you can't give that to, I can give that to an audience that has a vested interest, that's curious enough, that want to know about themselves, that will take a survey of any length. They're happy to fill it out. You saw people spent an average of 36 minutes. Some people spend over an hour doing it, but you can't expect that of the general population. My original plan was to put that on the student portal at my university, and then students, just when they go to check their schedule, they have to click, there's a survey, we'd like you to take it. They can click, no, I don't want to, but at least they have it open in front of them. And that's the way we get a lot of students to take surveys, but they're usually short. And they said that if I ask them to do this, maybe they'll start, but then they'll get bored and they'll just start clicking randomly, and the data, the information that I get will not be valid.
My question is, I saw the chart, monolingual group was 75%, I believe it was, but then the next page was 35% had a polyglot in their family. So is there some kind of correlation there, or what am I missing?
You're missing the fact that being a polyglot and being monolingual aren't the same. So, for example, I come from a monolingual family, but my father's a polyglot, my sons are polyglots, my grandmother's a polyglot, and they've been monolingual all along. So, multilingual refers to speaking multiple languages in the environment, in the neighborhood. Most multilingual people are not polyglots.
As far as the gay statistic goes, is there... So just in my personal experience here, I feel like I've met a lot of gay guys, but not as many lesbians. So I was wondering, is there more I guess I kind of just want to know my chances. But is there more gay guys, or more is it kind of straight down the middle? Same amount of gay guys and gay girls, or?
Again, that's something I could screen for right now, but I didn't do it, so I don't have that answer on hand. The general, as I was looking for statistics into that, the information that I got, somebody raised the point already that this is almost a generational thing, and that it's already built into the statistics, but people of your generation are much more comfortable or likely, or for whatever reason, to say they're either gay or homosexual or bisexual or anything like that than older people. So it might be worthwhile to run this through an age-related thing as well. But the general information that I got is that, yes, homosexuality per se is a bit more common among males, and bisexuality is a bit more common among females, but I'm not an expert on this. This is just what I found while I was getting this information.
All right.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative. I was wondering whether you contacted the reporter who wrote the article, and if so, how did he respond? Does he plan to do an update on the article, or?
She.
Okay.
No, I haven't contacted her yet. I don't know if I will. I got under my skin, but I guess I got it out by doing the survey. So.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Please do. Okay.
I don't know if it's in the survey already, but wouldn't it be a good idea to also ask a question like what kind of hobbies or interests, other than
I did do all of that.
learning languages, do you do that you think might have a positive influence on you being a polyglot?
I did do that specifically, but as I explained, my survey design was not optimal, so I bundled all those things together. And when I look at the answers in the current state, they show me the percentages relative to the other answers, not the percentages relative to the people who answered them. So again, that's the kind of thing I said I need to code and unpack.
Okay.
What do you hope to achieve with an interview phase? Would that be to maybe establish what people's motivations are for learning languages and whether any of those traits are related to it?
I guess I'm just thinking, in a certain sense, again with the survey, I just have to accept all the answers that people gave, and I didn't feel that people were really exaggerating. To any degree, because I just showed the basic question, how many languages do you know? But underneath that, I said, well, how many languages can you converse in right now? How many languages could you converse in if you had a week to prepare? How many languages can you read without a dictionary, with a dictionary, under languages studied? How many languages did you study in a formal environment with a tutor? Have you just picked up? Have you studied autodidactically? So I got people to really think about the answers they were giving. And by the time they got to that stage, I think they would have dropped out of the survey if they weren't interested in doing that. But nonetheless, I think that we all know that people have very different definitions of what it means to know a language, and we can't say one is valid and one is not. I mean, there are people who can get very good at memorizing a whole bunch of conversational phrases, and then they can go to a foreign country and throw themselves into it and meet people and greet them and tell them where they're from and get their needs met and have a good 5 or 10 minute conversation. But after that, they're pressed for more things to say. Are they qualified to say they know a language? I mean, most people couldn't do that. They have a start. If they were there, they could pick up on it. But there are other people who have much higher self-exigent standards. They would say, I don't want to say I know a language until I can do this or that or the other thing. So I guess what I would want to achieve with the interview is, I guess what I'm saying is, it seems like it's going to be thrust upon me to maybe write a book about polyglots, the polyglot community. And at that stage, if I'm going to be reporting on something, I'd like to follow up on it and say, if people have really interesting patterns and responses, to contact them and say, if I didn't get that from the data, what exactly do you mean when you say you know these languages?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alexander.